Okay, so going to the shed at the bottom of the garden, the original shed where I worked with Danny, how do we go about doing stuff? We liked the sounds. It was the sounds mostly. The breakbeats were pretty straightforward because most of the breakbeats came from Norman Cook's Skip to My Loop and Ecstatic Goldmine sample CDs. Back then you had to of course buy all these things because there was no internet. Nowadays obviously you can just get it. But we'd find the sounds. I mean, we would quite literally go out at the weekend, go to some rave, and then come back Monday night and start making the tunes that we'd heard at the raves. It was a sound. There were a number of very specific sounds, almost like lead guitar sounds in rock. There was the rave stab, those orchestral sounds that were played in patterns. They came in a few flavours, either stringed or choral. Those rave stabs. Then there was those knocky bass line stabs, those things like that cut the mid-range, drop the bass. That bass line sound, that was a very prevalent, almost staple sound. And along with the sub-bass actually came a little bit later. It wasn't until people like LFO said, oh, fuck it, we're just going to put this bass in here now and we're going to put some beats around it and then this is going to be our tune. They really kind of introduced what sub-bass could do and everyone went a bit crazy. So me and Danny would take all these ideas, sit down there on a Monday night after work and start working on tunes. They had no direction from the start. They were just, we like these sounds, how can we play it? Okay, that sounds all right, let's put some hip hop sounds in. Right, now we've done that, let's completely changed it. And this is how we did pretty much all the time. Okay, so the equipment that we used pretty much dictated the sound that we were going to get. The Hyperon setup when we first started making music was limited to one MMT8 sequencer, which was an 8-track sequencer. However, you could bounce tracks to get more tracks. We had a particularly bad mixing desk. It was a Samick 16 channel, which I think cost me quite a lot of money. It was about £300, which was an absurd amount of money for something that didn't make sound. It really annoyed me buying this stuff, rather than synthesizers, which I loved. I bought the Juno 6 second hand for £75 off a guy who ran Sound Gear. We also had an MC202, had a 303, SH101, so a lot of analog. I mean, that's all you could get back then. Digital synths were outrageously expensive. We got the Korg M1 and that cost me £1,200 back in 1990, 91, which was, it was 3 months' money, 3 months' wages. It's insane. Pretty much just getting a loan for everything. So what we had in the studio was everything you need. And in fact, if I had that gear now, I could make some great tunes, I feel. And the whole thing revolved around the Akai S1000. The Akai S1000 was stunning, way ahead of anything else. The timing was rock solid. The way you can manipulate sounds, the LFO routing, the fact that you could use velocity to trigger points of sample starts within the sample. It was just an amazing piece of kit. And even today, when I use Logic and the EXS24, I only have one front panel for the whole keyboard group, whereas in the S1000 you had multiple front panels for each sample. That was 20 years ago. My software still don't do it. So that was quite cool. It was really cool. So the beats would be played in or programmed onto the Alesis MMT8 sequencer. This was a laborious process. I mean, laborious, I got good at it so I could do it quickly. But with program, it's a step sequencer and you're presented with the data in like almost, I think it's like a 2x2 grid. So you have the note, how hard it was pressed, and how long for, and maybe another piece of controller data. I can't remember really. But that's all you had. There was no arrange screen, no nothing. In fact, someone who did use a computer to come down to explain to me how they wanted it arranged would draw it out as blocks, and then I would use those ideas and sequence it on this MMT8 because I wasn't using an Atari. The reason I chose the Alesis MMT8 was I tried the Amiga and used Music X and a few things like that. It was really far too complicated and I wasn't really ready for it. And the Alesis was so immediate and I've seen enjoy using it, so I assumed that it was the right thing to do. So we'd start by programming beats, using lots of samples, lots of sampling, always sampling. We even had books listing all our samples. All our floppies were full of samples. So, we made sample-based UK hardcore with synthesizers. So we had a lot of samples. We'd start with some beats, run some bass, and it would expand from there. There would be no direction. It would just be the same way people do now, experimenting. It's just that we finished tunes and all the experimentation went into one tune for some reason. So me and Danny had done quite a few tunes. We'd mucked around in the shed laughing and joking and done quite a lot. And Jay Hurren, the other Easy Roller, he'd gone off and started doing the DJing. He got himself on some mailing lists. He was doing quite well actually. He was there was him and a guy called Richie, who was the first sort of underground DJ in East Anglia, on the East Coast. In fact, his name even to today is East Coast #1. But Jay was he'd got himself on some mailing lists. He'd heard our stuff, kind of put 2 and 2 together, heard the Moving Shadow stuff, and sent Rob a tape of our stuff. And I think he literally had to make us do it, because I had been knocked back by my previous experience, and I was more interested in making the music. I hadn't really considered moving forward to a label, but Jay had done it and he'd sent it out to Rob, and Rob had liked it. And me and Danny strolled down at Stevenage, and we went to see Rob. We went to see Rob Playford in his little house in Stevenage, where he had one of those small bedrooms that now today, what do they call it, a closet room, or I don't know what they call it, but that was his studio. And one wall was his mixing desk, and then there was a rack of equipment, and then you could just about get a chair in there, and then we were kind of sitting sort of half in the hallway, half in this room, having this chat with Rob in this really, really tiny room. In fact, I can even remember there was a moment, I think he had one of the very first mobile phones, which was quite big, and it kept ringing. So it kept causing interference with the monitors. That bit of it, and he got annoyed. So he sort of casually, he meant to throw it to the hallway, and it banged its way down the hallway as he chucked it. It banged it. And there's this moment where I was looking, that's brand new technology, mate. I know that cost you about 500 or 600 quid. You just threw it down the hallway. So while we were having this really great conversation, there was this moment where it nearly broke his phone. That made me laugh. Anyway, we had this conversation with Rob, and his politics sounded good. The ideas that he had was good. I mean, it later transpired the guy was an incredible mind, great business head. Really brought a consistency and core, a major league core to drum and bass thing. And this was the start of that. When he spoke to us, I heard that. I believed what he said. I liked what he had to say. It seemed to me this man was interested in what we were doing for the sake of what we were doing. So after we'd had this chat with Rob Playford, we decided that we would mix the first EP. He chose, out of the half of the dozen tunes we sent him, he chose 4. And we were going to mix them. We wanted to mix them at another studio because our equipment was bad, etc. And Rob Playford came up. We used a studio called Beaten Track, which was down an old Beaten Track, and it was an old school rock and roll studio, pretty moody, rubbish desk, and we mixed it there. I don't really remember much about that session, but it went well, and Rob did it, and the engineer was terribly impressed that he didn't have to do anything, so he just sat out in the garden while we mixed down these UK hardcore tunes in his studio. And then a little while later, obviously Danny did the artwork. When I first met Danny, he did the only piece of graffiti in Becclesstown. So the artwork was done exclusively by Danny. I wasn't included in it. I didn't need to. It wasn't what I did. He did that, and there's no point for me to get involved. The first time I saw the first artwork, I was stunned. I literally speechless. He just turned up and said, "I've done this," and I was like, "Wow!" He sent it down to Rob, and Rob got it scanned and sent it back to him. It was really good. He was working with airbrushes and stuff like that, and it was amazing. It was amazing. It wasn't until the third EP that it went full colour, and I can remember we had a discussion with Rob regarding the amount of money that was coming back, what it was costing to do the album, the full colour, and we had a conversation, and basically it came to the point was, what are we doing? Are we doing this for art? Are we doing it for money? And we felt that the art had just as much as a value as the physical product. So we decided from the third EP onwards to go full colour, which was a much more expense, much more than it is nowadays. So yeah, that was how the artwork done. Danny did it all. He was exceptional with it, and I've got a few pieces of his still. And so eventually there became a moment where we got sent the first record, the first artwork finished with the vinyl inside, and this turned up, and we were down the shed that night working on music when this turned up, and we was all really over the moon, really quite impressed. And I can remember I still lived at my landlady's house while I was working out of the shed, which was owned by my father, but my sister lived there. And I remember walking back, this is the journey that I did many, many times. It was about 1.5 miles from where I lived to the studio. And I can remember as I walked back, I was musing over what we'd done, what we'd achieved. And as I walked, I noticed that my back had straightened up, and my chest had poked out a little bit, and I had a strut in my strides, and then I felt good. There was a self-esteem. I had actually achieved something. It meant something to me. It meant it was a validation, the go ahead to go forward. This is real. It will work. Keep on going. It was like, what I'm doing is right. Keep going. You know. It was, so for me it was another moment, another milestone, something that meant more to me in a more existential way rather than superficial. It was a defining moment in myself. And yeah, it was great. What can I say? Okay, so the first EP had 4 tunes on them. The first track was HE Anthem. This HE Anthem was an out-and-out piano tune, exactly like we heard in the clubs. Oh God, Shades of Rhythm were doing it. You know, the Chicago house sound had done it. So piano. We just mixed in breakbeats and synthesizers. Also on the EP was Watch Us Now, which was a bit of an analog workout. It was lots of fun, lots of breaks. Kind of. The title came from Danny. You know, it says on the Facebook page, but Danny. I've mentioned he's quite a character, and his repertoire of vocalizations would include many of the samples that we had collected, and one of the samples we had was called Watch Us Now. And Danny was a great dancer, full stop, a great dancer, a jazz dancer as well. And every now and then he would bust a move and kind of say, "Watch us now," you know, and that was kind of where that came from. Also on the EP was Another Rave, which was an out-and-out sort of happy hardcore, pre-happy hardcore, bouncy rave synth with 4/4 beats. Really nice to do. And the last track was called Frightener. The Frightener was different. The Frightener, we'd been sampling and we'd got together a load of samples, and we were itching to try them. This big breakbeat and this sample is like boom, boom, which came off a Pete Gleadle sample CD. So we looped that up and we had this Don't Go With Strangers sample, which I don't know why we used that or how it came or where it came from. And we played that in a little pattern. And we had the Arthur Baker Breaker's Revenge synth breakdown off an old electro record. And we'd sampled that, a few classic house sounds, and just all these hip hop sounds. And me and Danny are sitting there and we're rocking around and we're making this tune. And after about 5 or 6 hours, the tune was finished and we were playing it back looking for things to change, and there was nothing to change. And there was this moment, I couldn't understand that we'd made this tune in 6 hours. I couldn't quite get my head around the fact that this tune was completed. It was so good. I really enjoy this tune. I enjoy this tune now today. And I couldn't understand it. And the fact that I couldn't understand it, I was a little bit confused, and I was very young and not fully emotionally stable, and there was a moment where it scared me. It scared me that it wasn't possible. Perhaps it was a trick. Perhaps I'd tricked myself. Perhaps it wasn't real. And I had a panic attack. It was uncomfortable, and I can remember leaving the shed and sitting out in the small courtyard between my sister's house and the studio, and kind of catching my breath and being there. And I feel that Danny was the same. I feel that Danny felt the same, because we weren't communicating. There was mumbling, and it just seemed very strange. And somewhere in our conversation, as we shuffled around looking at our feet, Danny just went, "The Frightener." And that was it. That was the name of the tune. That's how that tune came about. Yeah, it was a really emotional encapsulation of UK hardcore. I'd say the music at the time didn't express any angst as far as I'm concerned. It was pure enjoyment. It was almost a celebration of dance. It was a celebration really of ourselves and our friends. So the music, the early rave scene was a voyage of discovery for so many British people at the time. You hear so many stories. Yeah, I was into football, then I went raving. You know, I was into doing this, and I went raving. It really it took over people's lives, and they found that everything else in their life wasn't as good as what they experienced standing in a field in front of 30k. You know, it was different. There was nothing like it. It was underground. You shared experiences with your friends. It was different from being at school, where everything was fall in with the crowd or we'll point at you and laugh. It was a case of show me how you can feel and I'll join you and celebrate it. And that's pretty much what the music meant. And that's what we experienced. You know, we went raving with our group of mates, and there are 100 stories from people my age of how they started going raving, and it's still the same today. You meet up with your mates, you have this experience, this rave experience, which brings you so much closer, produces bonds that even last to this day. And that's what the music meant to me. It was a celebration of ourselves, of enjoyment and discovery, and of friendship. You know, that's what rave meant to me. Tracks like The Frightener stood out because we'd slightly gone in a different direction with that one. When you make music, there are so many. You open a door. As soon as you start making music, you open to a door, and behind that door is a room with 1,000 other doors. And behind the first door could be piano tunes, and then there are techno tunes, and then there are experimentations with hip hop samples. And so each door opens up doors to other doors, and you want to explore each one of those doors because you've been through the first one and the second one, and there are other doors, but you might want to go and find another door. And the darkness of the Frightener was just an exploration of that time. I mean, it was done so quickly, there wasn't time to stop and reevaluate. There wasn't any other emotions that were involved in the making of that tune. It was something that happened in one evening. All the other tunes were perhaps over a few days, or the culmination of other bits of programming that came together, but not the Frightener. The Frightener was from start to finish an idea that we had that just flowed. It was almost like we weren't choosing the sounds automatically fell into place. I can't say there was any specific approach to the tune, because we just did the same thing that we did. It was just on that night something different happened. It was different, you know, and this does, if you make music yourself, you'll know this. If you work on tunes for 6 weeks, they won't sound the same as the tunes you make in one evening, because you've got so many different emotional states that are entering into music, and music is a reflection of your emotional state, full stop. So yeah, I can't specifically give you a reason why that tune came out like that. All I can say is that we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't know how that happened. But when it did, it surprised us. Because we lived so far out of the scene, there wasn't so much interaction to and fro. In the long term, I felt this benefited us. But when we travelled to London, I can remember talking to someone, I can't remember who it was. Back in the day, there was only people like Brian G and Frost and Ryder and Fabio. Foggy was even around. You know, it was coming out of. There wasn't that many. But when I did interact with people, someone did mention something to me. They said, "Oh yeah, the Frightener. Oh, you did the Frightener." And they took a step back and they went, "That's a dark tune." And that's pretty much how they left it. And that was the only feedback I got regarding whether people liked it or not. All I know was the record company wanted to release it. But I did know that to a couple of people, when I tell them about the Frightener, they always take a step back and went, "You made that?" Whoa. You know, so it had actually, not only had it's been an intensely emotional and stressful experience for myself, it had affected other people. And for me, this is the pinnacle of music. I mean, you make music because it hurts when you don't, and it hurts even more when you do. And it's like a constant battle. When I make music and it's going well, it's like it's pushing me away. It wants me to stop, but I have to fight through it to continue. And so when you make a piece of music and someone turns around to you and say, "That affected me in a negative way," which I find difficult expression verbally, that's when it's gone from your head to theirs. They have understood. They have understood how I was feeling, how we were feeling when we did the tune, and now it's crossed over to them. So although my personal angst experience of making that tune, had an effect on me, it also, as it transpired, affected other people.